You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is titled No Contact: Modern Solution or Modern Problem. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Welcome to today's episode. This topic was prompted by a video that I watched last night of 2 baby boomer aged moms who were lamenting about how their adult children had cut off contact with them, and now they had no contact with the grandchildren. And to be honest, I first started listening to this video, to this content, because I thought it was going to be from the adult child's perspective. And then I stayed on watching the video to kind of see, did they take any ownership of what was happening? Did they have any self-reflection? And there really wasn't. Not that I'm terribly surprised by that, but there was no claim of, this is what I did wrong, and I understand why my children cut off contact. There was a vague blanket statement of, we did the best that we could, that a lot of toxic parents and toxic in-laws like to say. And granted, that is true. I know our parents can only do what they can do. But at the same time, there should be a level of owning up to their part in the estrangement, and there didn't seem to be any of that at all. There was seemingly no knowledge of why their adult children cut off contact. They did acknowledge that there was some pain, and I acknowledge that there is pain for the parent who has estranged children. However, one thing that is the reason why I'm doing this episode today is they talked about how it seems like this is very popular to do, is to go no contact right now, and how it's kind of a trend, and how it's just very common, and it seems to be more so in the last 20 years, but not taking anything else into consideration. So I want to bring this episode to say I don't believe that going no contact is a trend. I think, this is my hypothesis, that it is a response to changing dynamics in how families connect. I'm going to dig into a bunch of different ways that I think that this is just something that is more perhaps visible now because of things like TikTok and YouTube and podcasts, and just how connected we all are, versus it just being this new trendy thing that people in their 40s and 50s or even younger 30s are doing because they just get mad at their parents and they want nothing to do with them. I have not come across any such case. I've never met anybody that it was a knee-jerk reaction and they just cut off contact with mom and dad without any explanation ahead of time. So, the first thing I want to talk about, and the first thing that came to mind really, was there is a vanishing distance buffer that used to exist. Geographical distance historically created natural boundaries. My 14th great-grandfather came on the Mayflower from England to the colonies, which was nothing at that point, way back when, and he left his family behind. Now, do I know the motivations behind taking that journey? No, of course I don't. He didn't leave any journals that I know of. He just showed up here. But what happened was that naturally created boundaries between him and his family of origin, between him and his in-laws. Was there tension there? Maybe. If things were really that great with the family, would he have left? I don't know. But that has changed, hasn't it? In the last, 20 years? the time frame that these ladies were talking about, seeing this trend of a change with family dynamics and more families becoming estranged, what has happened in the last 20 years? Let's think about that. Well, technology has virtually eliminated distance as an excuse to not stay in touch with anyone. In, 1980s, it was unthinkable to have any kind of video contact with anybody. In the 1990s, even the late 1990s, when my husband and I got married, it was expensive to make long distance phone calls. Long distance phone calls cost money. If you are that young that you don't remember that, it would cost anywhere between maybe 5 cents a minute, 9 cents a minute. If we were calling overseas to talk with my family in Costa Rica, it would be something like 30 cents a minute and up. And I remember as a little girl, my grandfather would have to make arrangements and plan ahead of time a call to talk with our family because he didn't own a telephone. He had to use the neighbor's telephone. And so we had to make a phone call. And if my grandfather wasn't there, they'd have to run over next door and find him and bring him to get on the phone. That doesn't really exist in nearly every place in the world. That doesn't really happen anymore because we are so connected. And so there is a loss of a natural, let's call it a cooling off period that distance provided. And what do I mean by a cooling off period? Well, in the past, physical distance meant time between interactions. Even if you lived across the state from your family, it would take time for a letter to arrive. If you decided to send a telegram, like they tend to do in all those old timey movies, it would take time for that telegram to be sent and then for somebody at that office to receive it and then reach out to the person for whom the telegram was intended. Letters, expensive long distance phone calls, and very infrequent visits to see family because you had to get in a carriage, you had to get on a train. It created natural pauses in conflict-ridden relationships. These pauses allowed emotions to settle down between the next interaction. And chances are, if you had a beef with somebody, let's say you had a awful relationship with your parents and you moved from the East Coast to Oklahoma Territory, you would probably not choose to write out all of that in a letter. Why? Because it takes time to put pen to paper or quill to paper. It takes time, and you want to write deliberately. And so most people, it seems like in the past, were much more conservative with their talk. They were much more respectful, and they wouldn't bring up kind of dirty laundry kind of stuff in a letter. And then the letters cost money. And I don't know, relatively speaking, how much it would cost to send a letter back then compared to, mere pennies now. But it was a barrier. And that caused people to take the time to allow any frustrations, any anger, any irritation to settle down between different letters and different bouts of conversation. Geographical separation created space for reflection and for perspective. Instant communication now has completely eliminated this protective buffer. So instead of having the time, number one, to get away from your family, to make that move from the East Coast to the Oklahoma Territory would have taken weeks, if not months. And that's if everything went well along the way. And then when you would write home, you wouldn't write about things that annoyed you. Chances are people would just write about the facts. Like, this is what happened. So and so had a baby. We lost 3 cattle along the way. We met up with some Native Americans and traded for pelts and grain and that kind of, those are the kinds of things that would have been included in the letters, not different things like, why don't you come home more? Why don't we see the kids? Although that probably happened. That probably did happen. But there was that barrier. It took time for these things to be communicated because there was such a geographical barrier. But now that that no longer exists, there seems to be a very unrealistic expectation, something that has never happened before in the history of mankind, that we are supposed to instantly respond to text, instantly pick up the phone, instantly do FaceTime, instantly respond to social media comments and posts. Perhaps technology has not helped us in this way. Another thing that has changed in really the last 20 years or so is the mobility revolution. People can have careers that are more mobile, and that has changed where and how we live. The tension that existed between building your own life and maintaining family ties has fundamentally changed. Many people were totally and completely economically dependent on where they lived. If you were a farmer, obviously you could not just go and visit family whenever you wanted to. It depended on the seasons. Was it planting season? Was it harvest season? Is it the winter? That was very limiting for different kinds of communication and visits. If you owned a small business, maybe you were the only grocer in town, you couldn't just leave and go somewhere else if you had a tense relationship with your family. You had to stay, because if you picked up and moved, you would literally be moving with no job where you're going. Yes, you can hope that. And some people did take the risk. There are those who are entrepreneurial and would take that risk anyway, but a lot of people don't. And so they would just stay where they were and just deal with the relationships, no matter how toxic, no matter how tense, no matter how challenging they were, because they felt like they had no way out. So this new economic independence that we have now, it gives us more freedom to make relationship choices that were not available 20 or 30 years ago. And then there's a different dynamic that has shifted the dynamics. When younger generations now have different opportunities, there is a sense of tension with the older generation. Why don't you want to stay here? This is where our family is from. This is where we have always been. This is where our roots are. Why would you want to move from this place and go somewhere else? And this was something that we faced with my in-laws. They don't understand why anybody would not live in the state where they are from, because that's where family is. It didn't matter if there were fewer economic opportunities for us there. That's where family was, and that's where we should stay. So being able to pick up and move your family across the country and basically have almost no downtime between the time that you left and the time that you land, and you're making money right away, that's very, very new, not including military, but that's a totally different thing. But perhaps a lot of people joined military service to have not only opportunities to get ahead and maybe make more money than their parents did. Maybe they didn't want to work in the coal mines. Maybe they didn't want to work in a factory. Maybe they didn't want to continue the family business. They wanted to try something different. But with that also came the opportunity to put some distance and some space between this younger generation and the older ones, to forge their own way, to do their own thing, to live life the way they wanted to live life. Hi, Miriam Susan here. I wanted to point out a new feature for you to reach out with any questions that you might have. It is an audio message submission option on my website, desiringpeace.com/podcast. If you have any questions, if you just want to reach out, if you just want to tell me, hey, thank you, I really appreciated this episode, I would absolutely love to hear from you. If you decide to submit a question, it could be chosen to be played here on the podcast or for me to just answer it if it makes more sense for me to just address your question without playing your audio. But I will be in touch if you reach out. Just send me a quick note. Go to desiringpeace.com/podcast. Submit your audio message now. Another thing that has changed really in the time my husband and I have been married is an awakening of awareness. There is so much more understanding of what a healthy versus unhealthy family dynamic is now than there was in the late 1990s when my husband and I got married. We didn't know the word boundaries except for when it came to like math problems and the boundary of a piece of property. We didn't know what gaslighting was except for the idea of literally lighting the pilot light in our gas stove. We didn't have all of these words to put on what we were dealing with. We just felt like we were being controlled and we didn't like it. We didn't even use the word manipulation, which is a very common word, and we would have known that, but that's not what we saw the relationship as. We didn't see the word enmeshed ever, yet that's what we were dealing with. So the access to all this information, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's podcasts, whether it's books, whether it's blog posts, that access has allowed us to name and understand what we are experiencing in ways that we never have before. Yes, there have been books written about this kind of thing for a long time, but again, if you didn't live close to your public library, if you didn't even know the words to look up in the card catalog, which was light years behind where we are now in terms of search, you had to know what you were looking for. So these kinds of things, it just would never have entered somebody's consciousness because they were perhaps available on a limited scale, but you had to have the means and an idea of what you were looking for to begin with. So, with this awakening of an awareness of what is happening, brings with it validation because now you feel validated because you can start to recognize patterns of dysfunctional behavior in your family, patterns of emotional, spiritual, financial abuse in your family. This awareness has given us eyes to see why behaviors that were once accepted as normal that are now being questioned. Now, if you had lived on a farm and your whole family lived on a farm and your in-laws were farmers too, and they all lived in that same area, you didn't have any awareness of what was normal or not normal. You didn't understand that just because your father in law had always acted that way did not mean that it was not normal. Those behaviors that he had were never questioned. And so now, with this awareness that we have, we can begin to start questioning, is this behavior actually healthy? Is this relationship healthy? Does this person really love me? Are they demonstrating unconditional love? All of these are new things, really, that have been brought about because of this greater awareness that we have, because of this greater access to information that just did not exist decades ago. We need to really think about the real reasons behind somebody going no contact. Framing this idea of no contact being a trend really misses the point. It is like a distraction, it is a deflection. It is saying, well, they're just doing this because it's trendy, instead of saying, what have I done in this relationship to bring it to this point? And like I said in the beginning, I have yet to meet someone who cut off contact on the spur of the moment. There has always been a very long history of things that have happened and of requests from family to please stop whatever it is that the adult children find offensive or unacceptable, no contact is pretty much always the last resort. Never have I seen it be the first option. Is it possible that some people do cut off contact without ever trying anything else? Absolutely, because we're humans, and sometimes humans do things in a rash way. But that's not who I'm talking to. If you are listening to this podcast, this is not you. You are listening to this podcast, I assume, for a sense of hope, for peace at some point in your family. I don't believe that anybody listening to this podcast is really looking for me to validate just cutting off contact without reason. These women that I was watching in this video last night, that's what they seem to be saying, that they really had no idea why their children cut them off. And I find that exceedingly hard to believe because I know the stories of the women I've talked to. I know our own story. I know the families of friends who have strained relationships with their family members. And it's never been just a one-time thing that caused them to cut off contact. There is often an invisible number of years of attempted boundaries, attempts at communication, attempts at reconciling and restoring a healthy relationship, if there was even one to begin with, before going no contact. And the decision to go no contact very, very often, I would say the majority of the time, reveals a pattern of issues in a relationship that at some point the adult children said, "This is enough. I can't handle this anymore." And the pain of being without a relationship with my parents is less than the pain of the relationship of having an ongoing relationship with my parents. So it is more painful to have a relationship with my in-laws than all the pain and suffering that we've had to go through without them in our lives. And I'll say that most of that suffering has been on my husband's side because they're his parents. But that's when no contact usually happens, is that the pain becomes so great that there's no other option. We're backed into a corner. We don't want to make that decision. We don't make it as a knee-jerk reaction. We have seen it coming. We have tried things along the way. We've tried to talk with parents. We've tried to get them to back off in certain areas. We've tried to put boundaries in place. Maybe we weren't that good at enforcing them, but they were stomped on or totally and completely ignored and disregarded in other ways. And then your marriage is rocky. The relationship with your children is rocky. Maybe the children are experiencing symptoms of the stress, and no contact is the last resort. It's not a trend. People who say it's a trend, I'm afraid, are not taking the time to really dig in and think about what is going on. And most of these people are the ones that are the estranged parents of adult children who are no longer in contact with them. They don't, from what I have observed online, they lack the self-reflection to claim any responsibility in the breakdown of the relationship. If you're the only one putting forth effort, if you're the only one that is seeking the good of the other person and they're only just seeking the good for themselves, that's not a healthy relationship. And at some point, whether it's your parents, whether it's your siblings, whether it's aunts and uncles, whether it's your friends or acquaintances, when the relationship becomes so draining that it's almost like all encompassing and it's taking away time from your marriage, from your children, that's when people start really seriously talking about and considering no contact. Again, I want to reiterate that going no contact is not trending because it is fashionable, because it's something that people are talking about. No, I would say the large number of people that seem to be going no contact with their parents is a response to real changes and how we connect. And then us having the opportunity and the choice to decide if we want somebody in our lives or not. Again, if this was 100 years ago and our family moved to another state, it would be unrealistic for my in-laws to expect weekly contact. It would be unrealistic for them to expect us to visit every 3 or 4 months. It would, unless we were exceedingly wealthy. Only the exceedingly wealthy were able to travel and move about and do all these things. But now, because we have FaceTime, because we have Facebook, because we have texting, because we have messaging, then it's expected that we remain in these enmeshed toxic relationships when the physical distance used to give that to us. Every situation is unique. Every family has a unique dynamic, and not every family decides that no contact is the option. Sometimes just moving is enough. Sometimes that gives you the physical space that you need to be independent, to be autonomous, to be the family and create the family in the way that you want to do it. But sometimes it's not. And so when people start criticizing and saying things like going no contact is so trendy, it's just the popular thing to do, I beg to differ. I beg to differ because it's very easy to look back in history over the decades and centuries and millennia and see that it was not uncommon for families to pick up and move, leaving parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins behind and go to a completely new place and never see that family ever again and never have contact with them ever again. And it's only been within the last 20 years or so that a new expectation has come, and that is continued instant contact. So it's really important to understand the deeper why behind the decision to go no contact. Yes, it is easy to paint with a brush that no contact is just a trendy thing, but that's really easy to do when you are the adult parent of adult children and you haven't taken the time to do any self-reflection. You haven't taken ownership of the part that you played in the estrangement. I highly doubt that any of those people are listening to this episode. But if you are, if you happen to be a parent whose adult children have gone no contact with you, I would encourage you to prayerfully reflect on your part in the breakdown of the relationship. Ask God to reveal it to you. Ask Him to show where you have failed, to show where maybe you are holding on to some bitterness, some sin. I don't know. But have the maturity to take the time and think about, what did I do to get us to this point? Because it takes two people to have a relationship. Do my husband and I take responsibility for some of the things that we didn't do well? Yes, we do. And at the same time, we have a responsibility as parents to raise our kids in the way we think we need to raise them and to protect them from unhealthy people. And that's what brought us to go no contact with my in-laws. I hope this episode has given you lots to think about and to consider if you are feeling guilty over thinking about going no contact. And consider all the things that I talked about. Consider the distance. Consider the new technology that has changed how families interact now. And think about how different this would be 100, 150, 200 years ago. If you had a toxic relationship with family in the 1700s and you saw an opportunity to move across the world, perhaps that's what you would do to get away from it and to start anew. I don't know. You can still do that now more easily than ever before, but just know that those toxic relationships do follow you because of this greater connectivity that we can enjoy and sometimes dread. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional-client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional-client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.